we talking a lot about infrastructures, right? So my first question is that it's actually very simple. So why the BRI is so centered around infrastructural project?
Can I say something first?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, I think if you look at China's achievement during the past 20, 30 years, the most remarkable achievement is infrastructure. I think anyone goes to China will be surprised by the magnificent infrastructure achievement. Okay, and the Chinese slogan is, if you want to be rich, build the road. Okay, so this is Chinese experience, and this is also Chinese success. And on the one side, on the other side, this is a Chinese overcapacity. That China, you cannot build endless fast train. You cannot build endless airport. You cannot, so now, according to my data, that actually China suffers from overcapacity in a number of areas, in some key material areas, and steel, cement, and some other glasses. A lot of areas China is suffering from overcapacity. So these overcapacity can definitely be used by Belt and Road countries around the BRI. So, and this is also Chinese most confident area, infrastructure. And also this is why that the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, is called, because China wants to establish a bank which is specialized in investing in infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in quickly. I totally agree. I think that it's a really good explanation. I think that, in a lot of ways, it's part of China's long history of infrastructure as like the key form of development. This isn't something that Xi Jinping brought in. This has been going on in China for a very long time. And I think, as you said, the overproduction of different things like steel, different materials, they can't be used in China. But at the same time, there's an interest to keep these factories open, keep these workers employed, right? That's in China's interest as well. So, it's kind of a win-win for them, right? You move the raw materials, help build the infrastructure. It also kind of ties in nicely because then it allows China to frame itself as a bit of an alternative often to Western loan practices, because it's actually offering material things, tangible infrastructure, instead of kind of money or sort of vague commitments. It allows China to be a bit more concrete in its relationship building. But yeah, I think I totally agree. It's also like it's related to China's productive capacities, for sure.
Daniel, you're muted.
China has acquired over the last 30 years, maybe 40 years, a comparative advantage in infrastructure through its own experience of developing China. So when you're in China, you have to remember that in the early 50s, in this fight between Mao and Stalin, Mao kicked out the Russian experts, about 10,000. And this created, in a way that perhaps no one fully understood, a kind of forcing China to develop its own expertise in these huge infrastructure projects. So they've done this with success and failure, success and failure. And in the last period, it was interesting that in Chinese universities, engineering schools, they teach management of these mega projects. So China had something to bring to offer many countries who are sorely lacking in roads, harbors, ports, electricity, clean water, clean energy, etc. So, and then they had money. So they have these, the policy banks where China is offering incredibly attractive investment interest rates and payback over a long period. But these loans, as I tried to say in my opening remarks, of course, are very complex because for so many countries in the global south, they are already burdened with debt from the IMF, from the World Bank and other institutions. So of course, the idea of debt stress has kind of galvanized in a very narrow way a lot of Western thinking. So allows people to say, well, China is sinking these countries. Well, in fact, debt is a very real problem, and kind of we map and track what is happening in the area of debt. And I agree with Professor Lee. China is has developed a kind of response to the problems of debt in weak economies. And if China had not loaned the money, these countries would have received nothing, because Western countries have basically had other priorities than addressing the problems of dependency and underdevelopment in the global south. So I think that's at the core of this. It's not a pretty story, but it is quite an inspirational story for countries who are getting the infrastructure they never had. But there will be failures as well as success.
So Daniel, right, earlier you mentioned about that the BRI, it's very innovative and unique. But some have argued that actually the United States, Germany, Japan had done those infrastructure developments in the past centuries. So I just have a question for all the panelists, right? Does the BRI really provide an alternative developmental model? I mean, also relating to the financial issue, right? Does BRI really creating an alternative financial structure? You mentioned about AIIB, and right. So that's the questions for all panelists. So one is whether it provides an alternative developmental model. The other is whether it provides an alternative financial model.
Yes, and I think the point departure of BNI regarding the first question you just mentioned about infrastructure is that China wants to do something different. And this is exactly many people publish articles, books on the difference of China's international aid. I don't know whether we should frame BNI as international aid, but anyway, the Chinese way of doing things which focus on tangible results, effective results, rather than the West focus on institutional building up, nation building up, democracy, human rights, and also this racial issues, etc. But China wants to go to the hardcore development issues. So this is one point. The second point is that definitely it is offering a Chinese model because China is exporting its successful model. This is what the Europeans and the Americans are very afraid that they understand that this is not just an economic project, infrastructure project, because once countries are cooperating with China, they are consciously or unconsciously accepting many ways of doing things from China. This is also some of the chapter writers in my book, especially some people from Poland, they focus on the Chinese norm diffusion or principle diffusion. And that is also one of the differences between the West and China, because the Chinese way is, for example, state-led, Chinese state-owned company, they play a major role, etc. And these should not be like that. So that is also the differences between the West and China in connection with your question.
I think, Alvin, you framed it nicely too in some of your questions in terms of like, is it still just kind of global capitalist development, but with Chinese characteristics? You know, it can be, I think, a transformation. And I think, Professor, your point about Wallerstein is so great for this, because it is like, it can be a global transformation that's still a part of global capital, but a kind of Chinese iteration of that. And I think you point this out nicely. You know, China is able to leverage, it doesn't have that same history of colonial intervention, of imperialist intervention that Western countries have. So it's able to go to countries and, you know, build on a kind of Bundug understanding, non-alignment movement understanding of kind of building solidarity, building infrastructural solidarity. And I think that Yeah, I think you pointed out nicely that the West is obviously concerned not just because of the infrastructure, but because they know that that means it's also an engagement with China on a deeper level. It's also about kind of like building different kinds of partnerships. And yeah, so I think that it can be both like part of the kind of global capital project, but it can be a different kind of global capital at the same time. And that tension can kind of coexist.
Yes.
So one of the I think strong points or selling point of the Belt and Road is that China has developed a very specific model where it controls everything. So when it comes to Pakistan, state-owned enterprises are building the dam or the hydroelectrical project or the railways or the ports, and they partner with a local firm. But it's a it's a top-down command model, which is advantageous for China because it gives them huge control over the completion of the project, as well as sourcing all the inputs from China. So when I was in visiting some sites in Africa, what you see, for instance, are the outgrowth of this policy, which creates a huge market for Chinese trucks, machinery, consumer goods, etc. So they have been able to develop a model, not a Soviet-style model, but something that seems to be very flexible according to the situation. So China is working with Israel, it's working with Iran, sworn enemies. So how can you work in such different contrasting situations, or working with New Zealand and working with Hungary, or working with other countries in Central Europe? So China has in its model a flexibility, which is very different than the IMF, World Bank, one size fits all. And in part, I think this is one of the reasons why China has been very effective in negotiating these deals around the world as a part of their infrastructural diplomacy, to form alliances and to develop international cooperation in Latin America, in Latin America, in Asia, and in Africa. These are very, very important geopolitical spheres where the Belt and Road has been very successful.